years. And he is now retiring after that length of time. Filling his shoes will be difficult at best, but to do it right, we're really reaching out to the community to ask people, ask you, what do you think we need in the next town manager? What type of person? What are the challenges or the things that you are most interested in seeing the town invest in? What's important to you? We held a forum last evening. There were probably 30 some odd people who came to that one. There was another forum this morning across the street, which there were about 10 or 12 people that came to that one, and then there's this one. So we're really trying to talk to as many people as we can in town to find out what are the issues most important to you and what are the qualities of the person who you would like to see be the chief for Concord, our town manager. So to do that, the select board went out to bid and found a consultant to help us do that. Somebody with the experience of doing executive searches for municipalities across the Commonwealth and elsewhere in New England. And so we hired Municipal Resources Inc. And I'd like to introduce you to Bob Stepchinsky, who is a former town manager himself and a town administrator, retired, and has now made it his profession to help other communities find the right person for their own communities. So I'm going to ask Buzz to facilitate this meeting. I'm going to have a microphone that I'll walk around the room with. I think it's easier if you speak into a microphone for everybody else here to hear you, and I'll be that person running around with the microphone. So I'm going to turn it over to Buzz.
Thank you. Thank you, Alice. I'm going to put my business cards here in case at the end of this you want to send me an email. I'll leave a bunch of them here for your taking and use if you want to. I'm Buzz Stepchinsky. I've been involved in professional municipal management for 40 years. I've been town manager in Wilmington, Massachusetts for about 10 years and 25 years in Andover. And with that experience, based on that, I've been working with Municipal Resources Inc. out of Meredith, New Hampshire, and we do municipal consulting. The full range of consulting from doing recruitments and selections like we're doing now for the town of Concord, to management studies of all sort, to preparing budgets for cities and towns that may need that kind of assistance, facilities, planning, you name it. If there's a municipal need out there, MRI does that sort of thing. So, with that as background, as Alice said, we had a session last night at the town house, and then a session this morning at 8 o'clock across the way here. So we've got quite a few comments from folks, but we wanted to meet with you to get your ideas on the challenges that the next town manager is going to have here in Concord. And we have, we're here really, it's kind of an open mic. We'd like to get your thoughts and your ideas of what the future is going to hold and the kinds of challenges we should make the candidates who think they want to be a town manager here aware of. So when they come to interview, they can be somewhat prepared about the issues that this community has at the moment and you think will be facing in the future. So with that, I'm happy to accept comments, thoughts, ideas, criticisms, whatever ideas you folks may have for us.
So I think what I'd like to do is have you either raise your hand or let me know that you want to speak, and I'll bring the microphone over to you.
Over 60 because they're aging in place. And that presents a special challenge to the select board, to the town manager, to the council on aging, to the senior center, senior programs, because folks like their town. They don't want to leave. They've spent a lot of years working on boards, committees, commissions, and they have a lot invested in the town and all their friends and whatnot, so there's not a huge eagerness to move away. I'm wondering if that's the same kind of thing here. Can we assume that folks enjoy living in this town and want to stay? Yes. Yeah? So what are the challenges in doing that? All right, step right up. What are the challenges, my friend? We got a live one. Thank you. Somebody's got to start it off.
Somebody has to start it, and some of you know me. Stephen Bader, River Street, I'm not afraid to speak. There are challenges with staying in town, and that one of the biggest ones that I see coming up is just the financial challenge. We've had our children go through school, or not, as the case may be, and in general, seniors are not seeing their incomes appreciating significantly. So we want to stay in town. We want to keep contributing to the community. But the question of can we afford to do that is a really big question. I would advise any candidate to take a good look and read through the Envision 2030 Concord Long Range Plan. They should probably look at the 2015 Housing Production Report as well. And I think they're going to face challenges with getting the town through some zoning changes that will allow accessory apartments so that people can stay and maybe get some more income from a rental. They need to be cognizant of the tax burden and realize that most of us are not getting 6-digit bonuses every year, nor is there potential for one the year after next. And so the new residents may have like the town as we do because it's attractive, it's cute, it's pleasant, everybody's friendly, and they want to move in here, but they need to be careful about expectations that they can afford, but we cannot. Or personally, I cannot. So many of us are house poor. We have houses that are worth a lot of money, and that's great for our heirs, but that doesn't allow us to pay this quarter's real estate tax bill or this month's utility bills. And we vote, and we show up at town meetings, at forums, at any opportunity. We have the time and the energy to let the town manager know what we're thinking, and we will. So I would put that out there as sort of welcome and fair warning, and here's what's on the horizon.
Thank you, sir. Others? We've done searches in other towns, and we've heard that in eastern Massachusetts. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Mary Hartman. I live in Concord Green, and I'm also a member of the Finance Committee, but I'm here speaking for myself. I really appreciate what the previous speaker said, but I have a specific recommendation. One of the things that our new superintendent of schools instituted when she was hired was something called zero-based budgeting, which is looking at spending, and instead of just looking at what we're spending and thinking, what more do we need? Looking at spending right down to the ground level and saying, what are we spending our money on, and do we still need to be spending our money on this? So it's really looking at every dollar you're spending. And this is something that corporations do, and it's a way to actually find money that you might be spending inefficiently. So my question is, is this something that we could ask candidates about if they are familiar with zero-based budgeting, would they be open to the idea? Because I really think, and I think Superintendent Hunter will also say this, it's a way to save money.
The short answer is yes, and that's all part of I would say that the tools that a good manager would have in their toolkit is the ability to do zero-based budgeting. There's a whole lot of other kinds of budgeting techniques. But yeah, we heard about zero-based budgeting, I think, last night at the forum. So other people, perhaps one of your colleagues from the Finance Committee was there and brought that up. So we heard that loud and clear. Thank you.
Buzz, I have a question for you. If we sort through and you determine the top priorities and you present them to the candidates, I can't imagine any candidate looking at Concord as an ideal location wouldn't say, oh, those are mine as well. But how do you determine the candidate's strength and whether or not it is a good match when basically you've more or less fed him or her, I'm going to say the answers, which is what this sounds like.
All right, well, it's a good question. And we do several things. Right? Listening to these forums, we get an idea of the profile for the candidate. So we will put that up. What the community wants in terms of the next manager. And some people have said, well, you know, we want to clone Chris. We like his DNA, we like to clone him. A little hard to do. But we get a profile and we put that out there. And there'll be managers who will read that from around the state and say, yeah, I can't, you know, that's not me, that's not my style. There are others that will say, yeah, I think I have 80% or 90% of that mix, and they'll seriously consider the town. Then the other thing we do is we're listening today, so I'll take notes, and we take the challenges, the opportunities that you folks are going to talk to us about, and we're going to turn that into 4 or 5 or 6 challenges that we put out to the prospective candidates. And we say, you know, this community has these challenges. Boom, 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 boom. So they'll have some idea about what they're getting into if they want to get into it. You know, what's in the mix here. And then, no surprise, we take those, and for the candidates that we think are good, we make them do essays. So we want to hear what they say, or we want to read what they've done in their community, by way of example, to address zero-based budgeting, or to address sustainability, or affordable housing, or this or that, or conflict resolution, or whatever. We want to see, we want a window into their brain, a window into their thinking. So we make them go through an exercise of writing some essays. And you'd be surprised, there's some candidates that we think are absolutely good, brilliant, and they don't want to put in the work. All right, they don't want to spend a Saturday or Sunday or a week, you know, researching, driving through town, visiting the community, looking at the local newspaper and going online and all, you know, they don't want to do the research. All right, so, and we didn't want them anyway. But if they're going to do the research and if they're going to write us some good essays, we'll have a pretty good idea. And then, you know, it all comes down to the fit in the interviews that they will have with the search committee and the background checks that we'll do and all that. So part of the job of the consultant isn't to embarrass the town. You know, we're not going to come forward with a candidate that has a history that doesn't reflect well. And as we've told people in other forums, you know, 29 years ago, when you folks, when your select board was going through the process of hiring Chris, you didn't have the internet. You didn't have Google. I mean, now, you know, it runs good and bad, but now we can find out a lot about people just sitting at a terminal and putting in, you know, Joe Smith. East Overshoe, Massachusetts. And if there's something bad about Joe Smith, we'll know about it. And so there's, that's part of, our job is to make sure that the folks that come forward to the Town Manager Search Committee, that Alice and her group has credentials and can do the job. And then the issue is, are they familiar enough with the kinds of things I want to hear from you today to really be a good fit?
My question is, what will be done about visiting the candidates and seeing them in action and getting ideas about their abilities from people that they work with?
Yep, that's another good question. We typically do not do that. That's something that we can gather from other sources. I mean, for instance, in my career, I was chairman of the Future Managers Committee for the Massachusetts Municipal Managers Association. So I know a lot of the folks, I know a lot of the candidates, because I've worked with them on committees and whatnot over the last few years. And reputations follow people. So I know for school superintendents, school committees like to go out and walk the street of East Overshoe and check out, Joe Smith and ask around. We typically don't do that. We can find out a lot, just by having a history in the recruitment and selection field. And then through the internet, and then we will then do a really kind of a police-based, financial-based background check on the individual for the select board. So they'll know any financial, police, legal, whatever issues that may have impacted their lives. Other concerns about the town? We've heard about traffic in the past, and heard about traffic, congestion, any issues around transportation concerns with folks. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm Jerry Boyle. I live over here on Central Street, and my concern is, why are we going through this process? We voted spending money doing this. We just got our tax bills, and we've got an assistant town manager who most of us, if they go to town meeting, know she's spoken at town meeting. We've seen her speak at other places, and you can get a pretty good idea of what her capabilities and contact, references are from other departments in town. And I just think we should just promote from within.
Well, late breaking news, folks. Not a candidate. I don't know. I don't know Kate, but Wicked locally, whoever they are, put out a newspaper, and apparently she's not a candidate. Now, if let's just say she was, typically, the assistants aren't going to say early in the process, before even the ad goes out, oh, by the way, I'm a candidate. And let's say theoretically she wanted the job and you all thought she was the best for the job. There's a lot to be said for going through the process and having that individual rise to the top. Because in my experience, the last thing you want to the select board make it look like, it was an inside deal. You didn't look outside, you didn't look to make sure that this individual had all the skills, the talents, the attributes that you wanted. And even if there's a hot inside candidate, I would recommend you go through a process to verify that for him or her. Now, I got to tell you, in the last year, we've done Acton, Bedford, Lexington, 3 good towns. Their assistants, in only one case, was a candidate. And, you know, there's one thing about being an assistant. Sometimes the assistant's the one that handles the bad news. When I was town manager, I did all the good news stuff. And I told my assistant, you deliver the bad news. And so oftentimes, the assistant has sort of a reputation around town as being the hard one, and we're not sure we really want him or her because they're not warm and fuzzy, they don't listen, they're tough, they don't smile, you name it. So, it's the unusual, believe it or not, it's the unusual assistant that rises. And I don't know why, but that's in my experience looking at a number of cities and towns. And oftentimes it's the way the manager has things set up. And if they are good and they rise to the top, great. That's really what a good department should be doing. Town managers is succession planning and cultivating and developing talent. I don't know, it's a long-winded answer. I didn't mean to get into a little speech, but anyway. Yes, sir.
What are the 3 biggest budget items that the town manager must be concerned with? And as newcomers to the area, I'm sort of sorry that you don't have a chalkboard there behind you with a sort of a schematic of all the departments and how they're set up within the town, so we get some idea as to the length and breadth of this manager's responsibility. But that's obviously...
Did you say you're new to town?
yes.
All right. I would commend you to go to the website and look at the town manager's approved budget for this fiscal year, for fiscal 19. It is incredible. It's terrific. And it's a very good document that lays out a lot of terrific, if you're used to reading financial documents and used to reading budgets and that sort of thing, it is rich in detail. Organization charts, all kinds of good stuff I've been through. It's pretty impressive. In fact, there are 2 budgets. There's one for the town, police, fire, public works, that sort of thing. And then there's another for the enterprise funds, for the electric light, water and sewer, recreation. So there's 2 budgets on the town's website, and then, if you really want to get into it, on the finance director's website, there's the CAFRA, the Comprehensive Accounting Financial Document, that the town has received awards for, and that's another 150-page document, just rich with information. Largest taxpayers, largest employers, information on the town's budget, and the town's credit worthiness, a lot of good information. But in terms of challenges, I think the issue is, from what we've heard, and what I know professionally, is just sustainability. We live in Massachusetts, Prop 2.5. We have limits to growth, limits to budget growth. And that's really the challenge with school issues, with, providing excellent services that this town is known for. So the biggest thing is to do it with limited resources. and try to meet the expectations of the residents. Tough to do. The finance, I had to hand it to the finance committee, they wrestle with this. You know, I'm not sure when you get his budget, in a couple of weeks or, well, you know, but whenever you get it, they'll be meeting night after night, sorting through it, trying to get it in balance with the revenues to bring the town meeting.
Sounds like we need a couple of people.
Well, and you do, and you know, you do have a couple of people. You have more than a couple of people. You got a town, this town's organized very well, by the way. You got a town manager, you have a deputy town manager, Kate Hodges, right? And then you have a terrific finance director, and then you have a budget director. No, there's, you know, the dollars are being watched, and you know, town accountant and all that. So it's not like, you know, it's not a one-person operation here. It can't be. One-person operations ended when Prop 2.5 came in 81 or 82. It is a complex operation, and you need, you know, and Chris and the select board have it organized in a very efficient way.
I wish I understood all that, but thank you.
Well, and you know, again, that's why I commended his budget to you. At your leisure.
I'm not going to go and sit. I'm not a financial person, so you've done it down for people like me.
I'll tell you, it's a AAA rated town by an outside source, Moody's Investor Service. Which you heard of Moody's, they rate city bonds, cities and towns, they rate, you know, funds and whatnot. AAA. I'm not sure I have to say anything more. That means it's a terrific place.
So maybe I could help with a simpler answer as well. You asked for the 3 most costly budget items in our budget. I may not have them exactly, but I think our member on the finance committee might. But police and fire, our public safety is a big issue. Our public works, which maintains all of the infrastructure, the roads, this water and sewer. And then we have Concord Public Schools. Those are probably am I right, those are the 3 largest line items in our budget.
The Concord Public Schools and then the town. Those are the 3. And under the town is the public works and the fire.
So, and unique to Concord, I think, is that we have a municipal light plant. You know, I don't know where you moved from, but Concord has its own light plant. We're not part of National Grid or Eversource, or one of the large investor-owned utilities. We have our own light plant in town. And so that's what I think what Buzz was saying. It's an enterprise budget. It gets its funds from us paying our bills, and it's not a line item in the budget. So it's self-sustaining electric plant that's owned and operated by the town, and we are all stakeholders. We are all owners of that light plant.
By comparison, we moved from town in South Carolina, and we pay as much tax here as we did there, or 3 times the amount of space we had down there as we do up here. So, interesting.
Can I wait 1 second without a new comment?
Frank Taylor, I moved, my family moved here in 1967. And actually, I think all the boards, they have assistants, I think you do a great job. And anyone can turn on almost even 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning or whenever. Practically all night. I don't care, they do a great job. They have more boards, more volunteers, and that's what I find that's great. And anyone can, any complaint or anything, the way they run it, it couldn't be better as far as I'm concerned. That's
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think what that speaks to is that he's right, we have a lot of volunteer boards and committees. And we rely on more than 250 volunteers to help make decisions about the town. So that's our few hands.
I recently went over the town survey, and things that stood out to me were the character of the town. People are concerned about that. The middle schools are in dire need of replacement, and affordable senior housing. It's too bad more people didn't respond to the questionnaire because it's full of useful information. And if there's any way to encourage people going forward to respond to it, I think it'll be best for the town.
Miss, I missed your last point. I got the character of the town, the middle school. What was the third?
Affordable senior housing
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yep. Thank
on
you.
a rental basis, not an ownership basis.
Did you answer?
Yeah. To respond to zero-based budgeting, when I was on the finance committee, what did we say, a little while ago?
Very short.
Lane Young was the chair at the time, and when she mustered off, she spent a number of years looking through the budget, pulling out the cost of the physical plant, which means the actual cost of the school buildings, and building them back into the budget. And when she concluded, her conclusion was that we could send every single one of our students to a private school for less money than we spend per pupil in Concord. So, zero-based budgeting, thank you.
Carmen Reese, I'm the town moderator, but I'm just here as my own self. Several years back, at the town manager's suggestion, the town charter was amended to eliminate the requirement that the town manager live within the town of Concord. And it was his recommendation to the then Board of Selectmen that be done to enable a search to be broader and more inclusive and include more candidates than you would if it was going to be required that the town manager were within the town. I think that makes a lot of sense. However, I do feel that we've benefited enormously from having our town manager live in town for the past 25 years and raise his kids here and send his kids to Concord Public Schools and have his running buddies in town and get his truck fixed here and do grocery shopping here. You know, the knowledge that he gains from living here and the knowledge that the town has gained of their town manager by seeing him around is pretty great. So, although it's no longer a requirement under a charter, I guess I personally would feel like it would be a really good thing if whoever our candidate was for, or that at least that ought to be a question. How would the candidate feel about moving to town?
And that's a hot issue amongst town managers and town administrators today. Because first of all, the cost of housing in Eastern Massachusetts, I don't have to tell you folks about that, we heard about it already. That's of concern. That'll be of concern to any candidate. But that's a concern, you know, if Emerson is recruiting, you know, a new doc, or, you know, a nurse, or an administrator. They want them to live in the area within, you know, a certain number of miles so they can respond in emergencies and whatever. It's tough for any employer in Eastern Massachusetts. Now, with that in mind, there is a lot to be said for residing in the community. I happen to reside I was required, my charter, to reside. I loved it. It worked, but not all managers are happy with that because, you know, when they're at Market Basket, they don't want someone coming up to them and saying, hey, what about that pothole? Or what about this? That, didn't bother me, but that could be an issue for some people. And as I said, actually was last night, this isn't a 40-hour-a-week job. I'm not sure how many hours a week it is, but it's a lot of time. And there are requirements, probably unwritten, that the manager's got to show up on Patriots Day. The manager's got to show up on, other high holy days in the community when, when there's something going on. It's got to be visible. This is not a normal kind of job, and the individual has to. It's a very good question. How are you going to? If you're not going to live in town, how are you going to deal with, commuting from, East Overshoe here to participate in any number of events on weekends? That's, it's not just an office job. Gotta be out there. Other hands? Yes.
Yes. I just wanted to bring up the fact that Concord is actually in a very good place to choose the next town manager, because we've just gone through our Concord long-range planning process, and which generated the document that really echoes a lot of the thoughts that people are expressing here. The concern about housing, about people being able to age in place, the fact that the housing that they could age in place in is being torn down, and large, very expensive homes are being built instead. There's just the enormous development pressures on the town at a time when we understand what we want in terms of our town character, and that doesn't necessarily include more development and elimination of our open space. And there's so many big issues. I'm not sure that it was this complex when Chris first came on board, but certainly I look at the task of the new town manager as being, from my perspective, daunting. And I think that we're also undergoing growth in our government, and so the job is not the same one. There's more staff, more people to be managed, and trying to coordinate that. I tend to work with the League of Women Voters, and we go up and we observe a lot of town meetings, and it always interests me that a lot of little committees are talking about the same issues, and I wonder how they're all brought together somewhere, and who has the final say over that. And so I guess we need another Superman, or I'm sorry, I'm a woman and I'm going to say superwoman, super person, whatever. And of course, climate change is bringing an enormous challenge to all communities. And so I think we need somebody at this point who has a sense of urgency about that. And Concord is well known for our efforts with energy efficiency and eliminating emissions and whatever, but also climate has a lot to do with the land, and we're going to be running into issues such as water. Do we have enough water? We tend to use a lot of water in Concord, but going forward, we need somebody who can comprehensively understand all these intricate issues and really prioritize what is most important for this community going forward. And I would say that it needs to also be somebody who can think outside the box. I tend to look at Concord as a fairly conservative community. I'm not sure it always was, but I would be in favor of someone who maybe isn't quite that conservative. It's important to find a middle pathway, I think, but it needs to be somebody who can go outside of what every other community is doing in the state or whatever. Because if we just go along with the flow, chances that we'll get to a good ending are not as optimistic. And I just wanted to, there's a lot of mention here about the schools and the fact that we could send every child in Concord to a private school for what we're putting into the schools, and I think that's quite accurate. And last year I attended a finance committee, Tom Tarpey was responsible for it, where he just had a gathering of community members to, give feedback on how the town is spending and what they should be doing. And one woman stood up and said, we moved to Concord because we can send our children to these schools, and they're, for all practical purposes, private schools. So when we talk about these opposing issues of people can't afford to age in place, and there's all this emphasis on, big structures, and they're conflicting. Somehow, and of course the select board is going to have a lot of say in this, but the town manager needs to get his staff on board. For part of the Concord Long Range Planning process, there was a meeting of the town management staff, and there were minutes that were put out right after that, and the minutes ran something like this. A lot of concern over the fact that there seems to be a lot of climate extremists in Concord. Now, I don't know what that means, but they were complaining because we passed a single-serve bottle bill, and that makes it hard for the town to deal with. I understand that. But now it's obvious across the nation everybody else is dealing with the same issue, and Concord just happened to be a little bit in front of the curve. So I'm going to stop there because I could go on for quite a while. But I really look forward to the process.
Well, your point's well taken. Concord is a leader in a number of areas, no question, and the candidates know that, the ones that do their research. Yes?
Judy's on record, and in addition to all the other excellent comments around what people are looking for in a town manager or what the town could use, I think it's very important to have really good soft skills. Obviously, we're going to be looking for a person who has all the technical skills and understanding how to run a town. I think it's critically important for our town character and how we have volunteer form of government to be very effective in working with the citizenry, being honest, being collegial, getting to know the citizenry of the town, and also being able to communicate very effectively, being able to explain things. And we talked about, can you put it in plain English? That's always very important to help us understand the issues and work through resolutions to the opportunities and issues facing the town. Additionally, I think it's very important for a town manager to also build a good staff, continue to maintain a good staff, trust that staff, and be an effective leader in addition to manager of that staff. And that should help, I think, towards sustainability in the town. And that kind of builds on Carmen's comment about recognizing our bylaws do not require the town manager to live in town. But I do think there are some real benefits for the town manager living in town, recognizing maybe extra effort, stress, work hours that a person puts in because their free time may not be actually their free time. But that is an excellent way, I think, for a town manager to get to know the community, the people in the community, and help in those soft skills. So I think the soft skills are extremely important also in who we choose.
Let me just ask a question about, I've heard about a new superintendent of schools. Does she live in town?
No.
No. Just curious. Can I just, as an aside, in my career, 2 towns, I probably worked with 9 or 10 superintendent of schools. The more successful superintendent of schools lived in town, and there was no residency requirement. And I don't know if that was just happenstance or just luck or whatever, but anyway,
Yes,
it's just
I guess
my 2 cents worth.
my observation is that soft skills are the most important part.
Yeah.
You can live in town and not have soft skills,
Yep.
and then it's disastrous. So I think, from my experience, it would be soft skills are very important, and that shouldn't, having someone live in town shouldn't supplant lack of soft skills
Now,
working with people.
Would you just build on the soft skills? You mentioned communication, but what other kinds of attributes would you attribute, or would you call soft skills?
Truly listening to people.
So everybody can hear you.
I would include, listening to people, engaging in people, sometimes having to make the hard calls, being honest with people, but doing it in a way that it is around the issue and not around the person or personality.
Mm-hmm.
And that would apply both to citizenry and also to people who work within the town. And when someone is appointed to a position or is hired into a position, giving them, especially if it's like hiring, coaching them to become maximize their potential, and making hard choices sometimes about even personnel. And then of course clearly communicating and having people's back also, as appropriate.
Very helpful. Thank you very much.
For want of a better description, does Concord have what I would describe as an architectural review board for new construction?
Alice?
We do not have a standing committee, although we have talked most recently about establishing what would be called a permanent building committee. And that would be staffed with volunteers of architects and engineers willing to help us whenever there's a large project that we're considering building to be part of that building committee. We don't yet have it established. We've written a draft charge for that committee, and we would hope to be setting one up.
Because I'm sure all of us are sitting amongst the beautiful colonial style homes, these square blocks being constructed street after street. And obviously there is a need for someone to review all building plans to make sure they fit in with the neighborhood and the character of the town.
So I just want to speak for a moment to that. There are certain areas in town that are historic districts, and all projects that are being proposed within the historic districts goes before the Historic District Commission to review for design and architectural standards of the external part of the building, not the internal. And we do have a building department that follows the building codes for which any and all residential construction and commercial construction has to adhere to. So it's not a willy-nilly construct what you wish. It's all fairly well regulated, but it's depending on where the structure is. And then this new building committee that I mentioned a minute ago is really for municipal projects, schools, municipal buildings, those kinds of things.
Well, we can take a walk around and I can show you a few buildings that are completely out of character with their neighbors.
I'm sure there are some.
I think it's great that you're running this process, and I guess my comment about Concord as a whole is that, I do agree with the gentleman that just spoke about the fact that we're well run. I think we've always been well run. We're well managed, we're administered well, we're led well, committees are strong, volunteer base is good. I think that what distinguishes Concord from many other towns in the area, are the decisions that have been made in many cases in the early 1900s or in the 1950s. For example, the decisions we made about zoning, some of the decisions that were made about resources. These kinds of decisions are generally made with the future in mind. And, people who have a clear view of the future and of the challenges and of the issues going forward are going to be successful in creating a town that's really distinguished. We are a distinguished town in many ways. On the other hand, I think we do share a lot of similar characteristics with all the other towns around us. And I think the challenges going forward, aging, sustainability, CO2, diversity, all these kinds of things are things that need to be thought about carefully. I think some of the decisions are going to be hard decisions. So I think that if we simply focus on being well run, being well managed, and working the numbers and so forth, that's good, but that only gets us so far. That's kind of the basics, or I call that the baseline. If we're going to be, a really successful town in 2030 and 2050 and 2100, we have to think about what things are going to be like in those years, and we have to plan for it. And that's why I think the work that's going on and is going on now with Article 51 around CO2 and climate issues is so important. A lot of tough decisions need to be made, and we need to have people who are passionate and smart and are willing to take make an unpopular, potentially unpopular decision because the future of the town kind of counts on it. If you look at Cambridge, Cambridge has has really stepped out in front on a lot of these climate issues, and their mayor is or was, I think she's still there, maybe she just resigned or finished her term, but very passionate about this stuff. So I think we're going to need some people or candidates who are able to think about the future and about the challenges. It's not just about Concord, it's kind of a general thing, and are able to confront that in a creative way and think about it and be passionate about it. Otherwise, I think that it's going to be a tough slide.
Now, your point's well taken about the zoning and the foresight that the zoning board, planning board, town meeting had, in the 50s or 60s, whenever your zoning was put in place.
But we're continuing to profit from those early decisions, and I think we're now at a point where, well, where do we go from here? Are we now at a new launch stage to move into kind of new terrain, or what? And I think somebody has to help us think about these things and be passionate about it. So that's what I would be looking for in a candidate.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hi. My name's Peter Fulton. I live locally. I guess you'd call me a triple header here. I'm a former town employee. I'm a volunteer. I'm chairman of the retirement board, and a resident, obviously. Are you entertaining comments here to take to the interview process?
It's an open mic. If you want to make some, certainly.
Okay. Well, is that the format?
Well,
forward. Are you going to participate in the interviewing process? Or?
Well, the short answer is yes. What we will do is have put out the ad. We'll get X many resumes. My colleague, Bob Mercier, and I will do phone interviews of the ones we think are worth bringing forward. And then we will work with and assist the town manager search committee in those interviews. So I will be sitting in on the interview.
Could you just tell me who makes up the town manager search committee? Citizen?
Alice?
Selectmen?
They are citizens of the committee, which we have members here.
Hey.
Raise hand, okay?
Perfect.
Thank you.
Excellent group. Excellent group. So they're going to hear some of the comments here, and as Jimmy's taking aggressive notes, that's terrific. So from a citizen standpoint, as you heard me say, I've got a lot of experience in town to the point where we touched on the town manager's residency here. When I started on the fire department, I was mandated to live in town. So it took me 3 W-2s, including the 4th from my wife, to qualify to live in town. All right, so I'm terrific. I'm glad I'm here. It's been since 1981. 3 children through the schools and so forth, and have done famously well. The bond rating is terrific. AAA bond rating, the enterprise accounts, with the lady mentioned the light plant, but reminded that also the water and sewer is an enterprise account. So it does pay for itself, and it's a well-run proposition. I think there's a couple of, I hate to use the phrase, but I'm going to use the phrase, there's a couple of glaring problems in town hall. And one of them is the propensity of lawsuits against the town, and from both outside interests and employee personnel. So if there's anything to be forwarded on that line, I'd like to encourage that to be researched and explored of a candidate that's going to take over this position. I think it's a large chunk of change that's being issued in settlements here that it's unknown to most of the public and most of the citizens. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, I just have one quick question. My apologies, I forgot this one, but the town manager currently operates under a strong town manager format. Is there any discussion about removing that qualification? Familiar with a strong town manager would be basically the privilege of hiring and firing directly is one of the key criteria of that designation. Any comment on that?
I'll leave that to Alice. That's outside of my...
So I'm actually going to ask Carmen to respond to that, because Carmen Reese is now our moderator, sat on the Town Governance Study Committee where this was discussed.
Thank you.
I was liaison to the Town Governance Study Committee, and that question was looked at very closely, whether we ought to make any change in the town charter to change that form of government, and the conclusion of the committee was that we should not. And the recommendation was made to town to leave it as it stood, with certain minor changes like gender neutrality and so forth in the charter, which have been implemented.
With that form of government, is that what you find to be status quo statewide with the town meeting?
No, it varies a lot town to town,
Yeah.
and we have open town meeting and a strong town manager form of government, and we have a limited number of offices that are elected. There are some towns, and Concord was one of them before we adopted the charter, that everything from the dog catcher on up, was an elected position. And so we don't do that anymore. We professionalized government, and we have appointments and full-time persons rather than elected officials for most of the core administrative positions. If you're going to have, the belief when we adopted our charter back in the 50s was that if you're going to have a truly effective, competent town manager with good leadership, you have to give them the authority to do that. With the check of a board of selectmen that he's answerable to and hire and fireable by. And that's the model that we picked, and it seems to have served us well since the 50s, and the committee recommended no change in it.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes, right up here, please.
I have to mention that I'm fully in agreement with the gentleman over here who spoke about the future of this community. It's such a beautiful place and and what I understand, they've been ahead of the curve. I'm sorry, you've been ahead of the curve for years here in Concord, and I realize that there are financial concerns for a lot of older people, but it's also important to keep up the reputation of Concord by staying ahead of the curve while still preserving the historic nature and all the wonderful things that Concord has. And just as an example, you probably in your electric bill this month just received their flyer, that 3/4 of the flyer was dealt with electric cars and how you can find out all about electric cars, and there's a website you can refer to. Well, if we don't have the infrastructure, for example, to support the electric cars, like having charging stations in apartment buildings. I called the town and found out that there are 27 apartment buildings, for example, in Concord. And there might be a way, for example, to provide for every so many people in an apartment building like that to have so many charging stations. I mean, I know that's just one small piece of the future of this community, but I think, it seems that Concord has been ahead of the curve for many, many years, and it's a shame not to continue to be that way, and I compliment the
I'll say something real quick here. I probably didn't say enough about Article 51. Article 51 is the action the town took to mitigate the effects of greenhouse gas, reduce greenhouse gas emissions to, I guess, cut it by 80% by 2050. There's going to be a lot of serious, work that's going to have to go into that. And I think there's a couple ways we can do that. We can nibble a bit each year, or we can get aggressive and and push really hard. I think the latter is the only way that by getting aggressive, it's the only way we're really going to distinguish ourselves and get out in front of this. And I just would hope that we would have the new town manager would have passion about this and would have a really good solid understanding, number one, and number two, that the new town manager would be willing to take a hands-on role, both with the selectmen and with the light plan on a lot of these issues associated with electrification of our energy. So, I know we have a strong town manager model, but I'm not sure it fully applies to the light plan. I think it should more strongly apply to the light plan.
Thank you. Others? Please.
I agree with Charlie that Article 51 is important and certainly requires all of our efforts going forward. And I want to point out also that it's really a community charge, that everyone has to be involved in this and not just committees, that we need to find a way to educate people so that they understand what role they can play. I also want to mention that the town of Concord passed another climate-related article last year at town meeting, Article 23, which was basically a community resilience resolution, and based on the fact that nature plays a role in climate, so that one of the issues that I'm aware of that will be coming forward is the town will want to build more solar arrays. Well, does the town plan to deforest more land in order to accomplish that? And I think that there's a very subtle need for people to understand the fact that when we eliminate trees, we eliminate rain, because those forests and trees are manipulating our local environment. So while we may achieve something on a broader goal, how we do it is going to be very critical. And trees provide cooling, they actually help precipitate rain from the sky. So there's a balance there. It's complex, and the whole community needs to understand the trade-offs as we go forward on that.
Yeah, hi, this is Shaw Yang. So a couple of things come to mind. One is the futures. Big thing about futures, embracing technology. So certainly broadband access to all the homes is important. Because town manager should be at least understand the issues and what upcoming technologies are, so you can make informative decisions. Another one is a totally different thing. It's probably more of education. My kids have gone through a system many years ago, so I may be a little out of date. But when they were in the Concord public school systems, I didn't see too many sort of subject of civic engagements, democracy, government, how it works. I'd like to see our kids now come out of high schools understand how elections are done and how, what the issues are. I mean, right now I mean, I just see kids without any understanding of Constitution, any understanding how things work. So it would be nice to have that as a priority.
I will second that, yes. You sure would.
Thank you again. Just a quick logistical question here. As you heard me say, I sit on the retirement board, so one of my great advocacies is for the employees in town, both current and retired. With this search in place, or proceeding rather, do you see is there any possibility that we'll be entertaining employees for input?
Well,
very simple question, whether
yep.
you have a gathering, a time frame similar to this, whether it be at the high school auditorium, for example, or something on that line, and offer it a couple of different time frames so shift people can attend.
I don't think that's on the agenda, Alice, unless there's been talk about that. It's not on the agenda at this moment.
Okay, but the process is quite long-term at this point. It's 2 or 3 months away. Chris is going to execute this town meeting, for example, so a new town manager will not be in place before the summer.
I think the target date is July 1, or if not before.
My point being, I think there's an opportunity for that to be considered.
That's a point well taken. You get sent down the steps.
I understand that in addition to the town manager form of government, there are at least 1 or 2 other viable choices for managing a town of this size. Would it be appropriate for when you review our situation, that you also review our configuration as a town manager form of government, and why exactly we chose that, and what that advantage that has over the other two. The other two, one's a mayoral system, and the other, I forget what that is. But there are other choices, and after 28 years, it might be well to really re-examine our premises.
Where's Carmen?
Carmen had to leave, but I could just make sure you know that over the last 5 years, we did a full, thorough review of the town charter, step by step, line by line, item by item. Some recommendations were changed, but every aspect of the charter was reviewed, including whether the town manager form of government is right for Concord. It was a very thoughtful committee of people who served as former moderators, select board members, town volunteers, and it was the opinion of that committee that this is the form of government that has served us well and they proposed that it's remain in place. So they looked at other forms of government. So that was recently done. The Town Governance Study Committee completed its work 2 years ago, and we've adopted a number of the recommendations. That report is also available online for late night reading if you can't sleep. There's some good points in there.
So that's a typical question, but it's not our charge, and it's something that, as Alice said, is part of a review that municipalities do from time to time. And look at other forms of government and changes to the charter if needed.
One more? Second?
I had a couple of quick thoughts on the question of the town manager living in town, and I know there are obviously financial considerations, but I think there's also a commitment consideration component to that. And nobody likes to move. I haven't moved in 30 years, but if I were taking a new job in a place that I expected to devote my waking hours to for the next 10 or 15 years, it would make perfect sense. If I thought I was taking a job that would be a stepping stone to something else after 3 years, as often happens with school superintendents these days, it seems, then that would be a good reason not to move into town. So I think that says something about whether it's a requirement or not, the willingness to do that says something about the candidate's willingness to commit to Concord, just as much as Concord's willingness to commit to that candidate.
Good point.
Anyone else?
All right, has everybody had their say? Committee, are we good? Well, thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate your candor, your honesty in this. It's very helpful going forward.
I just have one thing to add. If you go to the Concord website, concordma.gov, you'll find a lot of documents about the town manager search, including an email box that you can send private comments to MRI. So if you didn't want to say things out loud in this group or some other audience, you're welcome to send your private comments about your thoughts about challenges, opportunities, qualities that you'd like to see in the new town manager.
And I have my business cards here. If you want to take one, they're here. To send me any comments or thoughts going forward.